All right. So this week we're going to talk about conflict. And the big thing about conflict is the fact that it's unavoidable. So despite whatever our efforts are to try to avoid or try to circumvent conflict in our relationships, it is inevitable. And no matter what, at some point in our life, we're going to engage in conflict with some other people, whether that be a single person or multiple. And so when we're considering conflict, we have to look at the different management styles to be able to see how we engage in conflict, but then we can understand how others are engaging it as well. And by getting a further understanding there, we get to build a stronger foundation for how we engage in this type of conflict. So the first style that many of us engage in is competing. And so in some of our conflict, what we will do is we'll take the approach of trying to prove that we are right. We want to say, I'm right, you're wrong. We want to prove something to everyone involved. And so we may engage in argument. We may try to present a logical reasoning. We may even fall into destructive patterns like attacking or insulting or something along those lines. And while maybe taking a competing style can get you what you want, get the outcome you want, oftentimes it ends up leading the other person feeling hurt. It strains the relationship. So the competing style is something that we want to try to challenge ourselves to move away from. That doesn't mean there might not be a place for that. However, far more often, chances are a different style will be way more productive. Another style we take is the avoiding style. And this is where we avoid responsibility and engaging in conflict at all. And we do this for various reasons. We may just, conflict might be something that's uncomfortable to us. Different people have different thresholds to what they are comfortable with when it comes to the amount and style of conflict. So some people don't mind disagreements between people. Other people, it is very uncomfortable and anxiety provoking. And so that might be a way, be a reason we may avoid. We may even avoid to try to kind of like save the other person from some sort of uncomfortableness. However, what happens is it often leaves the situation much worse off. One, for us, is that we don't have our feelings heard. And because we're choosing to avoid it, we don't get our side of things mediated. And so our personal interests are ignored. And we end up hurting more from it in the end. Because oftentimes these situations build and they build, and maybe you fester up some sort of resentment towards the other person, or maybe they do. But problems don't tend to just go away. I've especially noticed this in my life when problems are ignored, they often go grow and grow and grow, and they're not something that ends up resolving on their own. And so that's one thing that we want to maybe try to move away from, is the avoiding side of things. In some situations, this might be helpful. Usually they're pretty rare. An instance for this is if, say, you're engaging with on some sort of project and you have a for work, and you're only going to work with this person for about maybe a day or two, and so some conflict starts to arise, and you could choose to avoid it just because it may be more productive just to focus on the task at hand and then move on. So that might be something where that might come into play. However, if it does get into the way of the productivity of what you're trying to do, then the conflict would need to be undertaken. Now, accommodating is another situation, because avoiding is I lose, you win. So is accommodating, but there's a difference in the focus. So the difference is in the regard for self and for others. So when you're choosing to avoid, you have a low regard for yourself and for the other person, because you don't want to engage in that style. There's just there's a lack of care in the situation as far as the outcome goes, and wanting to engage in that. And that might not be what you are feeling. However, that is what's being communicated. Because remember, communication is inevitable. So even if you're not communicating, that's communicating something to someone. Now, accommodating is you take a low regard for yourself, but a high regard for others. So that means that we avoid expressing how we feel in our side of things, and we just do what pleases the other person. And while this might make the other person feel happy in the moment, however, that is not healthy for the relationship, because then what happens is we end up being taken advantage of, or our feelings end up getting muted. And over time, that could build up festered emotions. So accommodating isn't any more productive than avoiding. There are times where you need to be able to take the other person's side. You may do it because it just helps them out in this moment. And so you might put your own personal feelings aside. And yes, there are moments for that. However, if that's a style, then that's something that progresses over time, and that's something that's being taken place uh, regularly, then that could be something that's destructive. Compromising is often where people try to fall under when they're trying to engage in healthy conflict management. And what happens is we look for finding that middle ground. You know, you and someone else has a disagreement. Let's meet in the middle is often a term that goes with that. And while that is better than some of the other conflict management styles, it still regards some sort of aspect of losing. So it means that both sides are compromising something, meaning you're giving up something, and so there's a part of that that just is on the negative side of things. If we can move to more of a collaborating approach, this is a win-win situation. This is where we try to look for a creative solution in the conflict to be able to have all parties come out with a win. So compromise would be 50-50, right? We're both about 50% win, 50% lose. Collaborating is looking for 100 and 100. It's looking for both parties, or if there's multiple people here, all parties, to have 100% win in this, meaning that you find a solution that neither of you were considering at the beginning. And because you got together and you collaborated, you found a solution that allows for both people to feel like they're happy with this solution. There's a downside to the collaborating. Obviously, it's nice when everybody can win 100 and 100. And that is our goal, and that's what we should strive for. However, it takes time. This is a very time-consuming approach. And in today's day and age, we're always in a hurry. We're always moving. We're always getting about. And so we don't often have times to engage in this collaborative approach. However, especially from like a workplace standpoint, but oftentimes in our relationships as well, the time invested up front to solve this problem makes up for all the time that would have been wasted because the problem would have caused further issues down the road. And so you spend a little bit of time now to then just mediate it and move on, versus if you avoid or you don't address it correctly, or maybe you compromised in a bad way, then the problem lingers and you're going to have to keep coming back and keep addressing this, and further conflicts down the road are going to keep arising. And so the total time is going to be far greater than if you just took the time to sit down and actually find a collaborative solution. So when I work with organizations and they bring me in, I've worked with groups of people to try to come up with creative solutions. And often these are for business problems, right? Trying to find new opportunities or trying to solve a problem within the organization. But many of the tactics work within our personal relationships. So the biggest thing that I find when it comes to creative problem solving is oftentimes the problem isn't defined correctly. Many times we're trying to find a solution to a problem that isn't actually the problem. Maybe it's a symptom of the problem. But it's better for us to spend a lot of time to try to reframe the problem to fully understand it. And oftentimes this requires us to take ourselves out of our normal patterns of thinking. And so we want to sit down and actually brainstorm, throw out every idea of what you think may have an impact on this problem, what might be causing this issue. And the goal here is to dump all of the ideas out onto a piece of paper, or write them down, or record them in some way, but throw out all the possibilities here. And then together, because this is in a collaborative approach, you're going to help kind of talk about this. You see all the things out on the piece of paper, all of the possibilities, and then you think, okay, so what is the true problem here? What is the root cause of these? And what you'll find is many of the things that you're dumping out are going to be symptoms. These are byproducts of the real problem taking place. And if you can get down to what that core issue is, then that's where you can start to begin to think of a solution. Many times, though, we're just trying to mediate the symptom. And so the solution, you can spend all this time trying to come up with a creative solution, but if you're only addressing the symptom, the problem's going to persist. And so what you really want to do is spend a good amount of time to really dig deep into what the core problem is. And that's going to take a collaborative approach. One of us isn't going to be the person to identify that. It's going to be all people involved that are going to want to be taking place in this. And you want to think outside the box when it comes to this. So when you are coming up with identifying the problem and then trying to find a creative solution, think outside the box. Oftentimes, it is the least likely opportunity that is going to help provide some sort of mediation. So it may not be what easily comes to our mind, right? It might not be the first things that come to our thoughts. It might take some real serious thought and thinking outside the box to find a solution that allows all parties to win here. And then you want to consider all aspects. So think about the picture of like a Rubik's Cube, right? Each side has its own different color. You got red, yellow, blue, green, all the colors on every side. And say this Rubik's Cube is solved. So each color is solid on each side. If we were standing on opposite sides of the Rubik's Cube, we're going to see different colors. You may see red, I may see yellow. And both those perspectives are right. However, once we take a look around and you consider all aspects, all sides, you begin to get a bigger picture of what the Rubik's Cube is. You begin to see that, each side has a different color and a different color and a different color. And you can see all of it and you get a greater picture of what the problem or solution really is. And so you want to really look at all aspects, and that's going to take you considering the perspective of other people. And so when you're engaging in these conflicts, you remember we talked about these like in our conversations module, we want to interact in this way of where we are listening and hearing the other person or people involved. Finally, it's important to understand what our conflict triggers are. There are things, they could be personality traits, it could be ways conflict is handled, but these triggers, they get at us and they could kind of invoke a high emotional rise within ourselves. And so what we want to do is try to understand, okay, what are these triggers? And then we can look at ways to mediate it. And so when you think about yourself, right, and you think about, okay, when I engage in conflict, what are the things that really get at me? And some of the common ones that the chapter presents is there's criticisms, right? Oftentimes when we are criticized by other people, that can make us feel negative. And so we may either feel like sad and may get, kind of back away from the conflict. It may invoke anger within us. And so we may try to get defensive and try to discredit the other person or something along those lines. But these things kind of invoke in some sort of emotion within us. And so it's important to understand, okay, look back and think, okay, when somebody does give me some sort of criticism, how do I take that? Other ones could be like demands, when somebody's saying you need to do this or go do this, when they take away your choice or your sense of autonomy, how do you react to that? Is that something that bothers you? Is it not? To kind of, you want to consider these things. Cumulative annoyance in regards to just a buildup of over time. You say something, there's a habit that somebody does that constantly, every time they do it, it just gets you a little bit more and more annoyed. And then rejection, of course, you being rejected by somebody, you offer a gift and then maybe they don't receive that very well. And so you feel rejected in that moment. But consider there's other triggers out there. And so consider what are the conflict triggers that maybe you undergo. And another aspect is try to look at how maybe the ways that you engage in conflict could be a trigger to somebody else. So that's a brief overview of kind of conflict management. We'll dive more into the activities in class. However, make sure to dive into the chapter. It explains many more aspects more thoroughly and takes a far more approach into looking into conflict. So make sure to do that. If you have any questions, as always, please reach out. But I look forward to seeing what everybody puts together for the reflection post. And thank you very much. Take care.